The airport was alive with the usual chaos. Flight announcements crackling over the speakers, rolling suitcases clattering against tiled floors, and the low hum of passengers murmuring in anticipation. Among them was Olivia Carter, gripping her boarding pass a little too tightly. She had never been a fan of flying, but work demanded it, and so here she was, clutching her carry-on like a lifeline. Gate 17A bustled with weary travelers waiting to board Flight 709, a red-eye to London. The airline agent's voice droned over the intercom, calling first-class passengers, then business, and finally economy. Olivia exhaled sharply, steeling herself as she shuffled forward in line. Behind her, a man in a dark hoodie kept his head down, clutching nothing but a small backpack. He hadn't spoken a word since he arrived. Captain David Reynolds stood near the jet bridge, exchanging nods with the crew as he adjusted his cap. 30 years in the cockpit had made him unfazed by the turbulence of life, both in the air and on the ground. His co-pilot, Jason Miller, was younger but skilled, his confidence evident in his easy smile as he greeted the flight attendants. "Weather looks smooth tonight," he commented as they stepped onto the aircraft. "Should be an easy ride." If only that were true. The passengers settled in, buckling seatbelts and scrolling through in-flight entertainment options. A mother soothed her crying infant, an elderly couple exchanged smiles over a crossword puzzle, and Olivia pressed her forehead to the window, exhaling slowly. She hated takeoff the most. The moment when the wheels left the ground, when the world below blurred into nothingness. Flight 709 taxied onto the runway, the engines roaring as it gathered speed. The plane surged forward, pressing passengers into their seats as it lifted into the midnight sky. City lights twinkled below, shrinking until they vanished entirely, swallowed by the abyss of night. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and the cabin hummed with quiet activity, flight attendants moving down the aisle, passengers adjusting their seats, soft murmurs of conversation. 30 minutes in, the plane had reached cruising altitude. The flight was routine, peaceful even. The turbulence was minimal, the air smooth. Olivia forced herself to relax, eyes fluttering shut as she tried to ignore the anxiety gnawing at her gut. But just as she felt herself slipping into an uneasy sleep, the overhead lights flickered. A low crackle from the intercom. Then silence. Captain Reynolds frowned in the cockpit, tapping the radio. "Ground control, this is Flight 709. Do you copy?" No response. Jason glanced at the dashboard. "That's weird. Comms were fine a second ago." Reynolds tried again. "London Control, this is Flight 709, requesting confirmation of transmission." Static. A ripple of unease passed between the pilots. Reynolds toggled to a secondary frequency. "Any available station, this is Flight 709, requesting response." Nothing. Meanwhile, in the cabin, passengers shifted uncomfortably as the lights dimmed again before stabilizing. Olivia sat up, heart pounding. Something felt off. A flight attendant, Lisa, moved toward the cockpit, rapping gently on the door. "Captain? Passengers are getting a little nervous. Is everything okay?" Reynolds cracked the door open, forcing a reassuring smile. "Just a minor issue with communications. We're troubleshooting it now." Lisa nodded but hesitated. "The Wi-Fi's out too?" a couple of passengers asked. "No connection at all." Jason raised an eyebrow. "Weird." Reynolds shut the door and turned back to the controls. "Let's run a systems check. I don't like flying blind." They scanned their instruments. Everything seemed operational, fuel levels normal, engines functioning. But when Jason checked their flight path, his stomach dropped. Captain?" His voice was tight. This isn't right." Reynolds leaned in. Their navigation display, once showing their course over the Atlantic, was now blank. No coordinates. No satellite positioning. Just an empty grid. A thin layer of sweat formed on the back of his neck. How the hell does an entire flight system just go dark? Jason swallowed hard. It doesn't. In the cabin, the unease spread. A businessman in seat 14 glanced around warily before pulling out his phone, checking the time. Then he frowned. The digits blinked erratically before freezing entirely. His breath hitched. He wasn't the only one who noticed. Murmurs rippled through the passengers as more people checked their devices, finding them frozen, screens stuck at the same unchanging time. The plane suddenly jolted, a violent shudder that sent drinks spilling, oxygen masks trembling in their compartments. A child let out a frightened cry. Lisa grabbed onto a seat for balance as she turned toward the cockpit. But before she could take a step, the cabin was plunged into complete darkness. Darkness swallowed the cabin, a suffocating void pressing against the passengers of Flight 709. Gasps and muffled cries punctuated the silence, panic thickening the air. Olivia clutched the armrest, fingers digging into the fabric as she tried to steady her breathing. Somewhere nearby, a baby wailed. A woman whispered a frantic prayer. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the lights flickered back on, but something was different. The hum of the engine sounded off, hollow, almost distant. The air itself felt heavier, thick like syrup. Olivia's stomach twisted as she glanced out the window. Her breath hitched. The sky was wrong. No stars. No moon. Just an endless, murky abyss stretching in every direction. A sharp metallic screech echoed through the aircraft. The overhead compartments rattled, some popping open to spill their contents into the aisles. A man in the row ahead unbuckled his seatbelt, standing unsteadily. "What the hell is going on?" he barked, voice tinged with fear. Lisa, the flight attendant, rushed forward. "Sir, please remain seated." The plane lurched again, more violently this time. Lisa was thrown against the seats, barely catching herself before hitting the floor. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, strained and unfamiliar. "This is Captain Reynolds. We are experiencing an anomaly. Please remain calm." Anomaly? Olivia's mind raced. What did that even mean? She looked across the aisle, locking eyes with the man in the hoodie. He was staring at her, expression unreadable. A moment later, he leaned forward. "You feel it, don't you?" "Feel what?" she whispered. "The shift," he murmured. "We're not where we were." A wave of nausea washed over her. She did feel it, an unsettling, almost imperceptible change in pressure, as if the very laws of physics had been altered. A sharp beep from the intercom silenced the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Reynolds began, but his voice wavered. "We have lost all contact with air traffic control. Our instruments are malfunctioning." A pause. "We are attempting to navigate manually," someone gasped. A murmur of fear rippled through the passengers. Olivia's pulse hammered as she looked at her phone. No signal. No Wi-Fi. The time display remained frozen, an eerie reminder that something was very, very wrong. In the cockpit, Reynolds and Jason worked frantically, flipping switches, attempting to reestablish navigation. The radar was blank. The stars, their guiding constellations, had vanished. Jason wiped sweat from his brow, hands shaking. "Captain, I swear the horizon line is moving." Reynolds gritted his teeth. "That's impossible." But as he stared out the windshield, a chill ran down his spine. The horizon was shifting, warping, undulating like liquid. Back in the cabin, Olivia felt an inexplicable pressure against her chest, like unseen hands pressing down. Around her, others shivered, rubbing their arms as if the air itself had turned hostile. A low, droning sound began to build, faint, just beneath the threshold of hearing. It wormed into their ears, setting teeth on edge. The businessman in 14B stood abruptly. "We need answers. We need to get in contact with someone." He reached up, trying to activate the call button, but the panel was dead. Lisa hurried to him. "Sir, please sit down. We're working on." The plane lurched violently to the left, throwing everyone sideways. Screams filled the cabin. Olivia's head slammed against the window, her vision swimming. Then, just as suddenly, everything went still. The engines hummed softly. The plane was steady again. The silence was deafening. Jason's voice was barely above a whisper. "Captain, do you see that?" Reynolds followed his gaze. And there, just ahead, something loomed in the darkness. A shape. Massive. Impossible. A structure that should not exist. The shape outside the cockpit window loomed in the void, an impossible structure suspended in the darkness. Captain Reynolds gripped the controls tighter, his breath shallow. It was massive, towering spires stretching in every direction, made of something neither metal nor stone, shifting subtly like it was alive. Jason swallowed hard. "What the hell is that?" Reynolds didn't answer. His hands trembled as he tried to adjust their course, but the plane wasn't responding. It was as if they were caught in an invisible current, being drawn toward the structure. The controls were dead. The instruments useless. Then the voice came. A low, reverberating whisper that seemed to echo inside their skulls rather than through their ears. "You should not be here," Jason gasped, his eyes darting to Reynolds. The captain heard it too. It was everywhere and nowhere, its tone neither human nor entirely alien. In the cabin, the passengers felt it as well. Olivia clutched her head as the whisper rippled through her mind. Others whimpered, some gripping their armrests so tightly their knuckles turned white. The businessman in 14B slumped forward, murmuring under his breath, repeating the same phrase over and over. "We were never meant to see." The plane shook violently. Lights flickered, the air itself pulsing with an unseen force. The pressure intensified, pressing against them from all sides. Olivia's vision blurred, her lungs straining as though the atmosphere itself had changed. Lisa stumbled down the aisle, trying to steady herself. "Captain, what's happening?" Reynolds' voice crackled over the intercom. "Brace yourselves." And then, everything stopped. No movement. No sound. The plane hung in the void, weightless, suspended in time. The whisper returned, softer this time, almost mournful. "You are trespassing." A shudder passed through the plane. The structure outside pulsed, its surface rippling. The stars, what few there had been, flickered out like dying embers, replaced by an abyss deeper than anything imaginable. Then the screaming started. Passengers convulsed, their bodies arching against their seats as something unseen passed through them. Olivia gasped, her vision fracturing. The cabin twisted, shadows warping unnaturally, stretching toward the impossible structure. Jason's hands flew to his head. "We have to get out of here." Reynolds fought the dead controls, gritting his teeth. "Come on, damn it!" The structure pulsed again. And then, a deafening roar filled the cabin, not from the engines, but from all around them, from inside them. The whisper had transformed into something else entirely. A command. "Leave." The plane jolted backward. The engines roared to life. The controls responded. Jason scrambled to input coordinates, his hands shaking. Reynolds didn't question it. He pulled back on the throttle, guiding the plane away from the looming structure. The moment they turned, the weight on their chests lifted, the shadows receded. The stars blinked back into existence. The plane was back. The radar flickered online. The frozen clocks resumed ticking. Passengers gasped, sobbing in relief, clutching one another. Olivia's hand shook as she looked out the window, but the structure was gone. The abyss had closed. Jason exhaled sharply. Captain, what just happened? Reynolds stared ahead, his grip on the controls tightening. He had no answer. Only the lingering voice in his mind. A warning. They had been somewhere they were never meant to be. And something had let them go.